All right, my name is Cody Goranson, and we are going to talk about video project number 2. Okay, today's topic: carbs. We're talking about carbohydrates. First off, I want to say carbs are a primary macronutrient that we use for energy and as fuel. Okay, to power ourselves and our different processes within our body, the ones we think about and the ones that we don't. Now, to get them, we have to consume them. Okay, so first I want to talk about the digestive process of carbs. So first off, you're going to eat and then you will chew. Mastification. Okay, and the saliva in your mouth has salivary amylase, which will start to break down carbs into starch. Okay, then your peristaltic waves or contractions when you swallow will send your food down into the stomach. Your gastric juices in the stomach will stop starch breakdown and allow it to continue once it passes to the small intestine. Okay, in the small intestine, you break starch into simple sugars with help from your pancreas. Okay, then, well, with what releases from your pancreas. But anyway, those simple sugars will then move to the liver, which will either be like converted into glucose or into glycogen. Okay, glucose we'll use like right away, and glycogen we will save for later. But now that the digestive process is out of the way, let's talk about the two pathways of energy. Okay, you have aerobic and anaerobic pathways. Now they're different in a few ways, more than just oxygen and not. Okay, aerobic with O2 needs oxygen, requires it, and in your aerobic pathways, glucose is completely broken down into CO2 and H2O, okay, carbon dioxide and water. It produces a large amount of energy, 36 to 38 ATP, and it happens in the mitochondria, okay? Now, big difference from anaerobic to aerobic is that anaerobic does not require oxygen, okay? O2 is not present, but the end products are also very, very different. In anaerobic glycolysis, you get lactic acid, and you only get about 2 ATP, which is considerably less than 36 to 38 as seen in the aerobic pathway, okay? Also, does not happen in the mitochondria. Anaerobic glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm, okay? But both have their purposes, and even though anaerobic produces much less energy, it has its benefits that we will get into regarding performance, okay? Now, aerobic pathways take more time to complete and therefore are less effective for short, high-intensity sports or bouts of activity, okay? But aerobic pathways, like I said, are quick and therefore efficient for high-intensity bouts of activity or sports, okay? But now getting into some specific scenarios and athletes, a 100-meter sprinter will actually mainly rely on their ATP PCR system, okay? This uses phosphocreatine to donate a phosphate to ADP to replenish stored ATP rapidly within the muscles, okay? But you don't got a lot of ATP, a lot of phosphocreatine stored up in the body like that, okay? So once that's depleted, you will have to shift to another system of energy. And a 100-meter sprint is kind of a long time to be sustained completely by the ATP PCR system. So once phosphocreatine is depleted, your body will shift to receive some energy from anaerobic glycolysis, okay? You don't have enough time, and you also don't need that much production to shift to aerobic glycolysis after your phosphocreatine is depleted, okay? You will have to go to anaerobic glycolysis to quickly sustain the energy you need to finish the sprint. But now, moving on, talking about goalies, okay? Goalies are kind of unique. A goalkeeper in soccer is unique in the sense that they will use all three energy systems, okay? First off, we'll say when making a save, let's say in the scenario of making a save, okay? You will use your ATP PCR system. You're going to use what you've got quickly stored and readily available in the muscles and the body to react and move quickly and efficiently to save the ball. Now, why is that your system in that scenario? Well, let me stand up. As a goalie, I don't really play soccer, but let's just, defensive position right here, drop down. I'm in the middle of the net, but I'm here, I'm waiting. Defense is coming right at me, but brother shoots top left poste, okay? So if he shoots up here, then I've got to quickly, I've got to jump out there. I've got to get to the ball very fast, very quickly, and very efficiently, or else that's a bucket. All right. So that situation, in that scenario, you would use ATP PCR system. However, let's say you're in constant pressure, like in that Mexico game, right? England, they put on the pressure the whole game, okay? But also, in the second half, I will say that Mexico had the ball for a long time on England's side of the field, okay? They were shooting a lot of corners. They were throwing a lot of corners in, kicking a lot of corners into the box right at the net, and the goalie was very active that entire second half, okay? Now, in that situation, you don't have the means to constantly rely on the ATP PCR system, okay? Soccer's a 90-minute match. So, in those scenarios of like constant, intense pressure from the other team, a lot of shots on net, okay, on target shots that the goalie has to save, you're going to be relying on anaerobic glycolysis, okay? 12 minutes straight of trying to save shots, or maybe in penalties, right? Penalty kicks, it's going to get pretty heated. You're not going to be able to rely on phosphocreatine to replenish your energy for very long. So, in those scenarios, you will also be using anaerobic glycolysis. However, also in soccer, sometimes the goalie also gets kind of some chill time, right? The ball's on the other side of the field. You're basically watching right now. You're waiting and waiting and waiting. So, in those scenarios, your body's not really using much energy. You're kind of in a recovery period. And in that sense, and in that time, you will be using aerobic glycolysis because you have the time, you have the means to produce large amounts of energy, and you can take the time to do it. However, that might happen, very briefly or even not at all in a game, or it could be the whole game. It just depends on the match and how the game goes for what a goalkeeper will be using, okay? But now, for a midfielder also pretty unique in the sense that they're at the middle of the field. There's not a lot of subs in soccer, so they might not come out the game. It's a 90-minute match. And at midfield, you got to do a little bit of it all. You got to play some defense. You got to go on offense, I think. So that being said, you would be mostly relying, in my humble opinion, on aerobic glycolysis. Well, like a good 50-50 mix of aerobic and anaerobic, and a slight blend of ATP PCR. However, let's break it down. So it's a 90-minute match. You're moving up and down the field constantly, nonstop, and probably not at maximal effort the entire 90 minutes. So that being said, you're going to rely on aerobic glycolysis to provide your energy to sustain you for those 90 minutes. However, you're obviously going to be moving much more intensely than aerobic glycolysis can provide for the entirety of the 90-minute match. So kind of like the goalkeeper, you're going to use that ATP PCR system when you can, if you are able to replenish that. But anyway, you'll use that in like super intense bouts of like defense, or maybe there's a turnover, you're sprinting downfield to get into position, you're running back to get on defense, things like that, right? Where you are probably going to use anaerobic glycolysis is in maybe a sustained effort to score a goal, right? Or a sustained effort to keep the ball at half court or half field, or playing possession, right? You're moving a little more intensely for longer periods than ATP PCR can provide, and too quick than what aerobic glycolysis can provide. So in that sense, as a midfielder, you're going to be fluctuating a lot throughout. But I would say compared to the other two, you'll be using more aerobic glycolysis than a goalkeeper or a 100-meter sprint. And that is video assignment 2 on carbs and energy pathways.